Thanks very much for having me here. This talk that I'm giving now is entitled "The Power of Podcasting from Jesus Christ to Andy Zaltzman." You've probably heard of Jesus Christ already. Have you? For those of you not heard of him, prominent turn of the First Millennium Middle East-based magician and raconteur. Which I will admit is a slightly Jewish angle on the subject, but I am slightly Jewish, so it's fine. I'm a second generation lapsed Jew, and as you know, lapsedness comes down through the father and Jewishness through the mother, and they sort of cancel each other out. So it means that I'm neutral on Jesus, but I know all the loopholes. I know, for example, that bacon is kosher if you eat it ironically. So very much all about the look in your eye. So I'm not, I was kind of born Jewish and slightly brought up Jewish, but I don't really have that much Judaism left in me, which is why I thought I could bring Jesus in. I mean, the only real legacy of my Jewish heritage I have, which I've really had ever since I was a very small child, is a lifelong fear of people attacking the end of my penis with a sharpened blade. But I don't know why that, I don't know why that is. So you've heard of Jesus. Let me introduce myself. I'm Andy Zaltzman. I'm a comedian, alleged comedian. There's still a court case ongoing from a gig I did in Leeds about 10 years ago. I'm the three-time European classical air guitar champion and four-time second place in the British National Silver Medal winning championships, which is a performance I was absolutely delighted by. I'm a compulsive bullshitter, and I do this podcast called The Bugle with John Oliver, who you might probably know from The Daily Show in the States and his new HBO show. Podcasting has been a big part of my career for the last 6-7 years, and therefore I consider podcasting really the only valid art form left on earth, by which I mean it is largely unsullied by money. And I've done all kinds of podcasts. I've done comedy podcasts, I've done cricket podcasts. I know far too much about cricket. I prefer cricket to reality. I find it more comforting. Even on one occasion I took part in a science podcast. Now, me and science are very much uneasy bedfellows. To be honest, my attitude towards science is if it wasn't in the GCSE syllabus in 1990, it probably isn't worth knowing. And if you doubt me, well, A, gravity still works much the same as it did back then. And B, how much top-end physics has Albert Einstein done since 1990? Not very much. I did do a few scientific experiments in my day. One, I found out that a shaved dog is angrier than an unshaved dog. Found that one out the hard way. And I also discovered that an agnostic child, if you throw it at a church wall, rebounds at increased velocity. So the history of podcasting, it goes back deep into the midst of time. 10 years, frankly, but it could have gone back deep into the midst of time, and it makes me think, how different history could have been with podcasting. You don't need to be a rocket historian to work that one out. And you think back, basically there was a kind of seeds of podcasting through history. Town criers in Britain, very much the podcasters of their day, with episodes such as "What to Do If You've Got the Plague," "Why You're Living in a Mud Hut Whilst Your Boss Is in a Massive Castle," and "Burn in Hell, Heretic Pig." So Homer, the pro-celebrity ancient Greek epic poet, very much I consider him a podcaster of his day in the oral tradition of passing down stories from one generation to the next. Arguably, having studied it at university, might have been better if he'd done it in one manageable chunk per week rather than the whole lot taking 3 days sitting around a campfire. The first caveman, basically, to me, that's sort of where that kind of form of communication originated, running around shouting, "Look out, there's a dinosaur," and B, "Raquel Welch looks phenomenal in a bikini." That was some form of primeval podcasting, if only they'd known it. Neanderthal man, you may think that with their Neanderthal attitudes, which admittedly wasn't quite such a pejorative term at the time. In many ways, it was quite de rigueur to have those attitudes then. But how much faster would they have evolved if they had been able to share their ideas globally through the medium of podcasting and tell each other which berries not to eat? And the ancient Romans, if they put out podcasts explaining how impressive their engineering was, maybe Alaric the Visigoth Stagnite wouldn't have got so out of hand. They'd have been more interested in what the Romans could offer them. Now, podcasting was actually predicted as a form of global communication exactly 100 years ago by a man called Professor Redhorn Snouterback, writing in this book that I managed to pick up a copy of in an antiquarian bookshop called the Future Functorium, in which he predicted various things that would happen 100 years from now. It's amazing how accurate he got it. He predicted the podcast. He said people will be able to think something interesting, speak it out loud, and be heard by people all around the world. Just a mechanism he got wrong. He just thought it would be like a giant, enormous ear trumpet. He also predicted, interestingly, that footballers would be paid 600 times as much as school teachers because they would have become 600 times as useful. He predicted that we would have a tattoo industry in Britain worth more than the entire manufacturing sector put together, which is basically a fact. And I mean, it is amazing, the explosion of tattoos. And you think just a generation ago, parents still had the ability to remember the names of all of their children without having them indelibly inscribed on their arms. Happy birthday, Debbie. So he also predicted there'd be an economic downturn in which there would nevertheless be a multi-million-pound industry braced around pubic topiary. And he also predicted, and this is crucial to the podcast, a single pocket device which would incorporate the telephone, the telegraph, the wireless, the gramophone, the diary, the secretary, the wife, the mistress, the gentleman's club, and of course the tradition of trying to knock down buildings by throwing birds at them. So he's very much a man ahead of his time. He also predicted that the England cricket team would drop one of their best batsmen just for being a bit of a dick. So he's very much a prophet, and so we see podcasts. It made me think about Jesus, but basically how much would his career have benefited from podcasts? I think the internet would have made his career a very different thing. There'd have been kind of various hashtag campaigns such as hashtag probably innocence, hashtag don't nail him up, and hashtag commute it to a 20 stretch in Wormwood Scrubs. But if he came back today, and I realise that is, from a lapsed Jewish perspective, a big if, probably the biggest if since Rudyard Kipling started projecting the titles of his poems onto the night skies above Gotham City. But if he did come back to, I think for a start, he'd have trouble persuading social media that he was the real deal. They'd probably just tell him that his beard looked stupid and where to stick his mother. Probably, if he came back today for a second start, he would almost certainly ride a Harley Davidson instead of a donkey. That's just basic PR. He'd probably invest in a decent lawyer rather than representing himself at court cases. And I think almost certainly he would be a podcaster. Jesus Christ would do podcasts, sometimes on his own, cranking out a parable, sometimes with his disciples, just chewing the cud, and sometimes an interview with someone he'd saved. So Lazarus, exactly what did your missus say when you walked back in and demanded dinner? So, and parables are very much the podcast of their day, and it was that really helped Jesus go slowly viral over several hundred years at the start of the First Millennium. Why would he use podcasts rather than other forms such as YouTube? Well, YouTube, I don't think it's as good, but it's too easy to flip from one Messiah to the other, depending on the epicness of their miracles, and also get distracted by videos of a dog falling off a skateboard. And that shows the difference between YouTube and podcasts. The audio of a dog falling off a skateboard, much less interesting than the video. Why would he not use television? Well, there's always editorial compromise, and you just know that the producers would always want him to put some more sex and violence in his parables. Radio, too slow. The commissioning process takes too long. It should be a medium that can react instantly to events. But in fact, George Formby, the way the Radio 4 commissioning process works, George Formby still waiting for clearance to do a show about the Munich peace talks of 1938, including a very amusing song about where Neville Chamberlain might end up using that piece of paper. So I think the podcast will give Jesus a number of great creative opportunities because it's opened up this form of broadcasting to everyone. You don't need to wait to be asked to do something. You can just have an idea and put it out there, and then within minutes it's being listened to by 7 billion people around the world, potentially. I mean, clearly that is very much a two-edged banana of opportunity, and you have to make sure that you have the right end in your mouth and the right end in your hand, and not just jabbing yourself in the face with one spiky end in each eye. But before that thing collapses like an overstretched metaphor. But as history is littered with people whose messages would have been better unbroadcast. But it does show that, and podcasts have an independence. Anyone can make them. They're cheap to make and they're quick to make. It also provides you with a creative blank canvas. which is a wonderful thing, certainly as a comedian, to have that just total freedom to do whatever we want in the show. Now, admittingly, not all blank canvases end up with a Mona Lisa on them. Some end up looking like Jackson Pollock has just vomited into a jet engine, if my kids' artwork is anything to go by. Yes, it's delightful, darling. Well, actually, to be honest, no, it does not look like a doggy. You're 6 years old. My trainer was made by someone in your peer group. Buck it up. So you can, quality parenting, and if there's a show that you've always thought you wanted to listen to, now you can just make it. If you've always wanted to listen to Alan Titchmarsh's Farmageddon show about how to be self-sufficient after a nuclear holocaust, you don't have to sit by the phone waiting for the BBC to ring up and ask you to do it. Now you can just go out and make it. It's no longer a pipe dream. You can light that pipe dream and smoke it, assuming that you can persuade Alan Titchmarsh to do the show, or pay for a Titchmarsh impersonator, or kidnap Titchmarsh and force him to do it. That's pretty much the way the BBC has always worked with him. He actually hates gardening but fears moths. They mostly just keep him next to a giant moth in the BBC building. But anyway, but also with a podcast, it gives you a chance to reach your own audience. Now, much of mainstream culture is a process of compromise. And you might think a lot of mainstream popular culture is very much like staring into an abyss of nothingness, able to hear nothing and see nothing, apart from the distant echo of civilizations past, asking why. But, did our grandparents really slam dunk Hitler into the wheelie bin of history just so we could watch unending karaoke and medium quality dancing on television until we'd all died inside? Well, I would say no, but the internet has now opened up the creative opportunities for anyone. We have shows now that aim creatively high, that cater for specialist niche interests. Now you can listen to great shows about science, about readings from great literature, shows with cultural insights, comedy shows untrammeled by broadcasters' restrictions. You can now listen to a woman in South Dakota telling you about the history of the bicycle pump, or Stephen Hawking and Cheryl Cole discussing with each other their favourite bits of science and music, respectively, or three teenagers somewhere in Burundi with an hour-long broadcast about how Arsene Wenger has to go if Arsenal ever want to challenge for the Champions League again. It's brought the world together with this community of values. None of those podcasts actually exists, but the point is they could exist, and in many ways that is more important than them actually existing. So the internet, it provides great, like I said, it provides great opportunity, and you get a very committed listenership with a podcast, which is why I think Jesus would really absolutely love. He would have loved this format, really committed listenership. That's basically what he relied on as his business MO. And because when you listen to a podcast, you actively download it. It's not like having the radio on in the background. You actively download it. Most people actively listen to it and concentrate on listening to it. And they listen to it in extraordinary places. We've had emails in to the Bugle from people listening whilst doing some of the following things: research in Antarctica, giving birth. I don't know if that works as a technical painkiller or not. Working for an aid agency in Darfur, having a vasectomy, and being in Uruguay. Those are all things that people have been... I think that would be very good to help Jesus spread his message to people having vasectomies in Uruguay whilst giving birth. I don't know if that's probably a bit of a niche market. But also, the radio, people don't listen properly to the radio, or they kind of drift. And you can, if you ever make it to the end of a travel bulletin, you'll realise this when they just kind of drift off. They realise no one's listening anymore and start saying, "Be careful on the M6, there's an escaped bison dressed as Ned Kelly, armed with a water pistol, and Debbie, if you're listening, screw you." So, and it helps as a listener, you can take advantage of dead time, such as those hours wasted having repeated vasectomies. So this is why I think, Jesus very much would have been a prime podcaster of his day. And I think one of the great things that the podcast, and like many things on the internet, it's provided a melting pot of ideas and creativity, unfettered depending on where you live, clearly a platform for the exchange of high-end concepts, stories, philosophies, culture, information, jokes, outright bullshit and contrived puns. Mostly, in my case, the last three categories. Jesus might have operated towards the other end of the creative podcasting seesaw, but I think we'd have been very much in the same playground. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers.